cheaper too. They University gave me for the odd bruises, needle marks, burns on my head, fingers, and even the genital soreness. I had no reason to believe otherwise. They had already begun to control my mind. The next year, I was sent to a lodge in Maryland called Deep Creek Cabins to learn how to sexually please men. I was taught how to coerce them into talking about themselves, and it was Richard Helms, who was deputy director of the CIA, Dr. Gottlieb, Captain George White, Morris Allen, who all planned on filming as many high government agency officials and heads of academic institutions and foundations as possible, so that later when the funding for mind control and radiation started to dwindle, projects would continue. I was used to entrap many unwitting men, including themselves, all with the use of a hidden camera. I was only 9 years old when this sexual humiliation began. I overheard conversations about a part of the agency called ORD, which I found out was Office of Research and Development. It was run by Dr. Green, Dr. Stephen Aldrich, Martin Orne, and Morris Allen. Once a crude remark was made by Dr. Gottlieb about a certain possible leak over New Orleans East involving a large group of retarded children who had been given massive doses of radiation. He asked, why was Wilson so worried about a few retarded kids? After all, they would be the least likely to spill the beans. Another time, I heard Dr. Martin Orne, who was the director then of the scientific office and later the head of the Institute for Experimental Research, state that, quote, in order to keep more funding coming from different sources for radiation and mind control projects, he suggested stepping up the amounts of stressors used and also the blackmail portion of the experiments. He said it needed to be done faster than to get rid of the subjects, or they were asking for us to come back later and haunt them with our remembrances. I've already submitted as much information as possible, including conversations overheard of the people, agencies responsible. I'm able to report all this to you in such detail because of my photographic memory and the arrogance of the doctors, the arrogance of the people involved. They were certain they would always control my mind. Although the process of recalling these atrocities is not an easy one, nor is it without some danger to myself and my family, I feel the risk is worth taking.
Project Pandora. In 1953, the Russians began to bombard the U.S. Embassy in Moscow with electromagnetic radiation in the microwave spectrum, but the fact was kept secret from the embassy employees. U.S. Ambassador Stossel contracted a blood disease, bleeding eyes, nausea, and eventually lymphoma. He and other employees eventually died as a result of the microwave attacks. Dr. Henry Kissinger sent a secret memo giving hazard pay to embassy personnel in the 1970s. Before the attacks, the USSR had met with the U.S. to try to head off an arms race in electromagnetic weapons, but were refused. In retaliation, they began microwaving the U.S. Embassy. It is possible that the U.S. government took advantage of the situation and used the embassy staff as microwave guinea pigs. The Department of Defense's Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, set up a lab at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research and participated in Project Pandora. Scientists began zapping monkeys to study the biological effects of highly Studies were conducted at the VA Hospital in Kansas City, University of Rochester, Brooks Air Force Base, Johns Hopkins, MIT, the MITRE Corporation, University of Pennsylvania, and other domestic and foreign labs. In one study, Dr. Jose Delgado experimented on 4 human subjects using radio waves, reporting they experienced different emotions, sensations, and colored visions. Delgado stated that these weapons were, quote, more dangerous than atomic destruction. With knowledge of the brain, he said, we may transform, we may shape, direct, roboticize man. I think the great danger of the future is that we will have roboticized human beings who are not aware that they have been roboticized, unquote. Dr. Delgado was in fact responsible for the development of a brain transponder that was used to roboticize human subjects.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
In the dead silence of the morning, at 5:29:45 Mountain War time, the Jornada del Muerto was bathed in an intense flash of a light that man had only seen from the stars.
He knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
The women peace campers at Grenham Common, England, claimed that they were attacked by U.S. electromagnetic weapons from within the U.S. Air Base. Scientists from Electronics Today measured some form of electromagnetic wave that was responsible for the illnesses they suffered. A team of doctors from the Medical Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons compiled a report on the condition of the affected women. The women first noticed a pattern of illness emerging in 1984. Women at different points around the camp appeared to experience similar symptoms at the same time, even though they were not in contact with one another. Large numbers of women complained of sudden feelings of extreme tiredness shortly before major events, such as the departure of a cruise missile convoy. Readings taken with a wide-range signal strength meter showed marked increases in the background signal level near one of the women's camps at the time they claimed to be experiencing ill effects, including vertigo, retinal bleeding, burnt face even at night, nausea, sleep disturbances, palpitations, loss of concentration, loss of memory, disorientation, severe headaches, temporary paralysis, faulty speech coordination, irritability, and a sense of panic in non-panic situations, and in one case, a circulatory failure that required emergency treatment. Many of these symptoms have been associated in medical literature with exposure to microwaves, and especially through low-intensity or non-thermal exposure. These effects have been reviewed by Dr. Robert Becker, twice nominated for the Nobel Prize and a specialist in electromagnetic effects. His report confirms that the symptoms mirror those he would expect to see had microwave weapons been deployed. British defense officials have denied any form of electronic signal was being used against the protesters. The Department of Justice Electromagnetic Weapons Program. The Department of Defense uses the Department of Justice to develop and test non-lethal weapons as an aspect of deniability because many of these applications violate existing treaties. By using the Department of Justice and classifying these programs as crowd control, they are able to avoid scrutiny and can violate the spirit of the law without technically being in violation of international treaties. In 1993, the National Institute of Justice Initiative on Less Than Lethal Weapons recommended that state and local police departments in America utilize psychotronic, electromagnetic, and other mind control weapons against American citizens involved in, quote, domestic disturbances, an open-ended term that could include family arguments. The report said, quote, short-term research will be completed to adopt military technology to use by domestic law enforcement, including laser, microwave, and electromagnetic weapons, unquote. The Washington Post reported, quote, the Pentagon and the DOJ have agreed to share state-of-the-art military technology with civilian law enforcement agencies, including exotic non-lethal weapons, unquote. This new approach to law enforcement was showcased in a 3-day secret conference on non-lethal weaponry at the Applied Physics Laboratory at Johns Hopkins University in Maryland. The conference head was Colonel John B. Alexander, Program Manager for Non-Lethal Psychotronic Defense, Los Alamos National Laboratory. Attending the meeting was Attorney General Janet Reno, military weapons specialists, and representatives from state and local police departments. Subjects included radio frequency weapons, high-powered microwave technology, acoustic technology, voice synthesis, and application of extreme frequency electromagnetic fields to non-lethal weapons.
Question about some of the technology that you're developing to fight the war on terror, specifically directed energy and high-powered microwave technology. When do you envision that you can weaponize that type of technology?
Goodness, it is in, for the most part, the kinds of things you're talking about are in varying early stages. Do you have anything you'd add?
I don't think I would add much. I think they are in early stages and probably not ready for employment at this point.
But you sound like you're willing to experiment with it.
I think that's the point, and I think, and we have, I think, from the beginning of this conflict, I think General Franks has been very open to looking at new things if there are new things available, and has been willing to put them into the fight even before they've been fully wrung out. And I think that's not referring to these two particular cases of directed energy or high-powered microwave, but sure.
Just the head was burned, and the other parts of the bodies wasn't anything that's happened on it.
Al-Ghazali reported that he had seen 3 passengers in a car, all dead, with their faces and teeth burnt, the body intact, and no sign of projectiles.
There wasn't any bullet. I saw they teeth, just the teeth, and no eyes. All of them, with the body, nothing for the bodies. Just the teeth and all the, the heads were burned.
There were other inexplicable aspects. The terrain where the battle took place was dug up by the American military and replaced with other fresh earth. The bodies that were not hit by projectiles had shrunk to just slightly more than 1 meter in height.
Except that the bodies is killed by the bullets. Most of them that become very small. It's like that, something like that.
Talk with the colleague Dr. Saad Al-Faluji, which is the chief surgeon in that hospital. Dr. Al-Faluji said to me that from the survivors that he operated, that they said they did not hear any noise. So there was no explosion to hear, no metal fragments or shrapnels or bullets in the bodies. So they themselves were thinking of some strange kinds of weapon which they did not know.
No gunshot wounds.
No. I don't know what it was really. We are here 10 surgeons. We couldn't decide what was the weapon which been hit this time.
But inside the bodies you did not discover ordinary bullets.
all of them being, we didn't find bullets.
Yeah.
We didn't find bullets. But most of the injured people being dead. So they took them immediately to the refrigerator. We couldn't dissect and see. But those who are alive, we couldn't find any kind of shells. We didn't find shells inside their body. Outside
Seems to be a new weapon.
it seems a new weapon.
They try to do experiments on our civilian.
We don't know what was.
Nobody can identify what the type of this was.
26 in the past. About 20 of them. Some of them have no head. The head being cut. Some of them, the arms, the legs. The only one who didn't injure was the driver. And really, I don't know how he reached our hospital. Because one hand, one arm was in his lap. One head beside him. It was a very, very strange, horrible thing. In the roof of the car, there was part of the body, momentum, intestine, brains.
Yes, all parts of the body.
It was a miserable, it was very, 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 very miserable. I told them before.
Do you have idea with what kind of weapons they attacked that bus?
This bus, we didn't know what kind of weapon would be hit. Really, what we saw, cut arms, cut legs, cut head, abdomen, open abdomen.
Intelligence agencies have infiltrated and created some satanic groups, with the resurgence of these groups beginning in 1966, particularly with the birth of the Church of Satan, founded by Anton LaVey. LaVey studied criminology in San Francisco and worked in the San Francisco Police Department Crime Lab. He also worked as an informant for Interpol. Prior to the Church of Satan, LaVey ran a group called the Magic Circle. LaVey's most famous associate is the National Security Agency General Michael Aquino. At the time of his membership in LaVey's group, Aquino was an Army specialist in intelligence and psychological warfare. In 1973, he became the executive officer of the 306th Psychological Operations Battalion, contemporary with his founding of the Church of Set. General Michael Aquino wrote, "From PSYOP to Mind War, the Psychology of Victory." Aquino's thesis stated that enemy populations could be subdued by inflicting a state of psychological terror and feelings of imminent destruction. He discusses the use of psychotronic weapons or electromagnetic weapons that influence the mind. Capitulation could be induced without firing a shot by extremely low-frequency signals piggybacked on broadcasts of radio, TV, or microwave communications in order to influence and manipulate the thoughts and feelings of the target population. During the 1960s, he was prominent in the Church of Satan and a close friend of Anton LaVey until he started his own Church of Set. A police intelligence report dated July 1st, 1981 reads, quote, "The Church of Set is a group of hundreds of members that operates on a national level. Michael Aquino is the official head and rules through a council of 9 who are in fact his lieutenants," unquote. At least 2 members of the Council of 9 at that time were members of Army intelligence. In the late 1980s, Aquino was accused by the San Francisco Police Department of being involved in a satanic child molestation ring centered on the daycare at the Presidio military base where Aquino was stationed at the time. Probable victims numbered at 68, many of whom had contracted venereal disease. 22 families filed $66 million in claims against the Army, claiming that criminal charges against Michael Aquino were dropped due to pressure from the Army. General Aquino admitted to renting the German castle where the Nazi SS were formed and reenacting the secret ceremony among fellow intelligence officers dressed in full Nazi regalia. General Aquino is now the highest-ranking officer in the National Security Agency, along with General Black and General Hayden. It is important to remember that General Aquino is first and foremost a military intelligence officer with over 40 years' experience in counterinsurgency operations and an expert in psychological warfare. General Aquino's psychological warfare campaign has started or infiltrated cults and other closed systems as part of a concerted effort to control large numbers of people and to destabilize the centers of constitutional and legal authority both here in the United States and in other nations. This methodology is part of a concerted plan that spans several generations. The Church of Satan and the Church of Set, as well as other cults and mainstream organizations, are closed systems with their own belief systems that are insular and separate from the reality that most people take for granted. These closed systems allow large numbers of people to be manipulated into performing antisocial acts that most members of the greater society would not contemplate. Aquino first participated in MKUltra-related activities in Vietnam as part of the Phoenix program in the 1960s. These ongoing MKUltra operations are functioning as a counterinsurgency and infiltration operation aimed at destabilizing the United States and other industrialized nations. The following cults have been used by General Aquino or his associates to continue MKUltra operations outside of the laboratory. The mass suicides at Jonestown of 890 people had similar threads, a cult with sinister connections. Jim Jones, who had connections to the CIA, set up his utopian experiment on the same land the CIA had used to train mercenaries to fight in Angola. According to investigators, the Jonestown experiment was conceived of by Dr. Lawrence Laird Layton, staffed by him and financed by Layton. The African-American cult had at its core a Caucasian inner council composed of Layton and his family. Layton was a chemist in the Manhattan Project and head of the Army's Chemical Warfare Research Division in the 1950s. The People's Temple cult took over the Mendocino State Hospital as a part of a government pilot project to evaluate the feasibility of deinstitutionalizing mental patients. After a reduction in state funding, most of the patients at the Mendocino State Psychiatric Hospital were released into the custody of the People's Temple. Congressman Leo Ryan was assassinated in his attempt to investigate the cult. The pathologist in Guyana reported 80 to 90% of the victims' bodies had fresh needle marks. Other victims had been shot or strangled. In 1981, the survivors sued the former head of the CIA for, quote, enhancing the economic and political powers of James Warren Jones, unquote, and of conducting mind control and drug experimentation on the Temple flock. The Manson family was associated with the Process Church, which according to the Utah Department of Public Safety moved to southern Utah and changed their name to the Foundation. In a 1990 internal memo authored by church authority Glenn L. Pace, allegations were made of ritual abuse and human sacrifice. Pace writes that he has met with 60 victims of ritual abuse, but there were probably 2 to 3 times as many victims. 53 were female and 7 were male, 8 of which were children. All are members of the Mormon Church. 45 victims alleged they witnessed or participated in human sacrifice. The majority were abused by relatives. All had developed psychological problems such as multiple personality disorder. Quote, the memories come in layers. The first might be of incest. Another layer might well be the memory of seeing people hurt or even killed. Then they remember having seen babies killed. Another layer is realizing that they participated in the sacrifices. One of the most painful memories may be that they even sacrificed their own baby. I have only seen those coming forth to get help. They are in their 20s and 30s for the most part. I can only assume that it is expanding geometrically, and am horrified by the numbers represented by the generation who are now children and teenagers." Unquote. Dr. Joseph Mengele found that trauma bonding and mind control work best when the victim is forced to kill someone they love, usually a twin. The Franklin conspiracy refers to a sexual blackmail operation and savings and loan fraud that began in Omaha, Nebraska in the early 1980s. Larry King, a 300-pound pedophile, operated a national child prostitution network that catered to wealthy patrons and Republican Party insiders. King was one of the fastest rising stars in the Republican Party. He sang the national anthem at the Republican Convention in 1984 and 1988. King and his associates defrauded Franklin's Savings and Loan of $40 million and used the residents of Boys Town and other children to videotape powerful and influential men and women engaged in sex acts with minors. These blackmail operations took place during fundraising parties for the Republican Party. Those involved stayed late for the after party that included drugs and sex with minors. The strategy of early MKUltra was to use sexual blackmail operations that targeted political figures in order to ensure continued funding from legislators. Victims who came forward testified that King and his associates performed satanic rituals and human sacrifices. Many of the children who came forward with their stories have since been murdered or imprisoned. The most prominent and vocal victim has been held in solitary confinement longer than any other person in Nebraska history. Larry King served 2 years for fraud and was promptly employed by his good friend, the editor of an Omaha newspaper. The Unification Church of Reverend Sung Myung Moon had close connections to the KCIA, the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, since its creation by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. 4 of Moon's early leaders were Army officers with KCIA credentials, and Moon's most influential aide, Dr. Bo Hai Pak, was liaison between the CIA and the KCIA, making numerous trips to the NSA headquarters at Fort Meade, Maryland. Moon's church is fabulously rich, with at least 600 front groups. It purchased the Washington Times newspaper for over $1 billion. Moon has claimed that he is the reincarnation of Jesus, Buddha, and Mohammed. He preaches love, but attacks his critics mercilessly and uses the terminology of violence and apocalyptic revelation. In March of 2004 in Washington, D.C., the Reverend Moon was crowned as the Prince of Peace in a ceremony at the Dirksen Senate Office Building in the presence of 86 U.S. congressmen and 26 UN ambassadors. The Children of God cult in Argentina has been involved in ritual abuse of children for decades, but has evaded conviction despite voluminous, undeniable evidence and victim testimony. David Moses Berg founded the church in the 1970s and advocated using sex to entice new members into the church. Berg's own children and former members have stated that they were forced into sex between the ages of 4 and 10 years old with high-level church members. The victims also testified to a sexual blackmail and infiltration campaign aimed at some of the most powerful men in Europe, particularly in the media, legal community, and government. Powerful figures of political and financial support for the family include Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi, Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, and King Juan Carlos of Spain. The sect currently estimates its numbers at 300,000 converts in 60 countries. In 1992, the Family Children's Choir sang in the White House for Barbara Bush to kick off a Christmas show in the East Room. The sect also sang for George Bush Sr. after he toured the damage of Hurricane Andrew in South Florida. The Cult Awareness Network was founded 2 decades ago in the wake of the mass suicides in Guyana that claimed the lives of 890 of Jim Jones' followers. The nonprofit national organization assisted the desperate loved ones of people caught up in the cult scene. The organizations targeted by CAN were the KKK, the Aryan Nations, dozens of obscure fundamentalist and evangelical Christian groups, the Church of Satan, the Moonies, followers of political extremist Lyndon LaRouche, and the Church of Scientology. An organized blizzard of lawsuits produced judgments totaling $5 million and led to CAN's financial ruin. In 1996, their logo, furniture, and phone number were auctioned off by a bankruptcy judge. Scientology lawyers took possession of 20 years' worth of CAN's highly sensitive case files containing information on thousands of people who had turned to CAN for help in rescuing their friends and relatives. Scientology is known for harassing its enemies and retaliating against suppressives, people who ridicule Scientology teachings. These teachings include L. Ron Hubbard's decree that humans are made up of clusters of spirits called Thetans, who were banished to Earth about 75 million years ago by an evil galactic ruler named Xenu. Hubbard was a pulp fiction writer who'd served in the Navy and hit it big in 1950 by coming up with the concept of Dianetics that he dubbed a modern science of mental health that remained at the core of Scientology practice. One of its staples is a simplified lie detector called an E-meter, which is supposed to measure electrical changes in the skin while subjects discuss intimate details of their lives. Hubbard claimed that unhappiness sprang from mental aberrations called engrams, and that counseling sessions with the E-meter could help rid them of them. Scientologists refer to the extensive and expensive process of clearing the mind in order for this to occur as auditing. But during the 1970s, the IRS conducted some auditing of its own and accused L. Ron Hubbard of skimming millions of dollars from the church, laundering it through dummy corporations, and stashing it in Swiss bank accounts. Although he died before the case was adjudicated, his wife and 10 other former church leaders went to prison in the early 1980s for infiltrating, burglarizing, and wiretapping dozens of private and government agencies in an attempt to block their investigations. The majority of Masons join and undergo rituals and rites that seem to have no meaning. It is only when they enter the highest levels, the circle within a circle, if you will, that the secret knowledge is shared as to what the organization and its rituals are really about. This knowledge is imparted to a select few who achieve 32nd degree status or higher. What these rites are, and what this secret knowledge is, has yet to be proven. The Masons are one of the most prominent links between victims of satanic ritual abuse. Victims of SRA are in effect victims of MKUltra experiments in childhood. Literally thousands of people from different parts of the country who have never been in contact with each other are telling essentially the exact same story. That as very young children, these people were forced to participate in satanic ritual abuse, including child rape and ritual sacrifice. The consistency of the stories, the links to MKUltra and satanic ritual abuse, seem to be a fantastic story at first, but victim testimony is very consistent, and the association of both programs to high-level Mason members has been repeated many times. Many of the personalities involved in the original MKUltra experiments were high-level Masons, including Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, Dr. George Estabrooks, Dr. Ewan Cameron, and others in the intelligence community. Masons have been accused of many things over the years, but it is equally likely that the Masons were infiltrated by CIA perpetrators of MKUltra in an effort to control a closed system and have access to experimental subjects. MKUltra was moved out of the laboratory and into these closed systems of various kinds that could be manipulated and used to supply large numbers of children for mind control experiments and blackmail operations without directly implicating the CIA. MKUltra and the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. Dr. Martin T. Orn is an original board member of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, the FMSF, as well as a senior CIA researcher at the University of Pennsylvania's Experimental Psychiatry Laboratory. The FMSF was created to deny the existence of cult mind control and child abuse, and is staffed with psychiatrists connected to the CIA and their mind control experimentation. The phenomenon of children being coached or led to invent tales of abuse or make up such stories does exist, but comprises a small minority of the reported cases of child abuse, between 2 and 8% of all reported cases. One survey found 88% of therapists considered ritual child abuse a very real social problem. Only 5% of all child abuse cases ever enter the courtroom. Half of these end with the child returned to the custody of the abusive parent. Dr. Orn's research into hypnoprogramming at Cornell University in the 1960s was paid for by the Human Ecology Fund, which also funded some of Dr. Ewan Cameron's brainwashing and remote mind control experimentation. CIA-funded black psychiatry at that time specialized in electroshock lobotomies, drugging agents, incapacitants, hypnosis, sleep deprivation, and radio control of the brain. The FMSF founder, Dr. Ralph Underwager, and his wife openly advocate pedophilia, saying that it is God's will adults engage in sex with children. Underwager told a British reporter in 1994, quote, that scientific evidence proved 60% of all women molested as children believed the experience was good for them. Dr. Underwager is the world's foremost authority on false memory, but in court is repeatedly revealed as a charlatan. Numerous other members of the FMSF have connections to pedophilia, covert operations, and black psychiatry. Peter and Pamela Frade, executive directors of the FMSF, have been accused of child abuse by their daughter, a professor of psychology at the University of Oregon. The industrial production of FMSF stories in journals, newspapers, and TV have shaped public opinion. The very concept of false memory serves the same purpose as Holocaust denial. The major crimes are obstructed. The accused wears the veil of a martyr, and the victim is reviled. Dr. Douglas Besheroff is director of the American Enterprise Institute and former director of the National Center of Child Abuse and Neglect. He writes articles that attack the victims of abuse and has been caught fabricating statistics when claiming scientific rationale for his claims. In 1986, Besheroff published Unfounded Allegations, A New Child Abuse Problem, and numerous other cover stories to confuse the issue. These individuals are engaged in a psychological warfare operation to cover up reports of the agency's mind control operations. For years, the CIA collaborated with cults, many of them founded by the government, in order to conceal the development of mind control technology. Dr. Besheroff associated with Irving Kristol, a veteran CIA psychological warfare specialist. Ritual abuse skeptics with CIA connections are covering up the latest phase in CIA-sponsored mind control experimentation. The McMartin Preschool. In preparation for the McMartin Preschool child abuse trial, 389 toddlers were interviewed. Nearly all of them described abuse at the preschool, and do to this day. Some 80% had physical symptoms, including blunt force trauma of sexual areas, scarring, rectal bleeding, and sexual diseases. Paul and Shirley Eberly published the only 2 books available on the case, The Politics of Child Abuse, 1986. They achieved national status as child abuse experts. In courts of law, their work is frequently cited. They lecture widely to receptive audiences and have been speakers at a conference held by Victims of Child Abuse Laws, VOCAL. These two individuals ran an underground tabloid, Finger, in the 1970s. Finger delved heavily into sadomasochistic sex, sex with children, and sex acts involving human excrement. These two pedophiles seek to portray every abuser as a victim of mass hysteria, satanic panic, and witch hunts. They are just two of many. The parents of the McMartin preschoolers hired scientists and technicians who unearthed a series of underground tunnels beneath the school, confirming the children's testimony. The longest tunnel was 45 feet long and 6 feet below the school, with a 9-foot chamber spoken of by the children. Another branch led to the triplex next door, surfacing beneath a rollaway bathtub. Forensic tests on thousands of objects found at the site included 200 animal bones. The tunnels were dug in 1966, the year of the school's construction, by the father of the defendant, Charles Buckey. Buckey built the school and worked for Hughes Tool Company. There is an old adage, Hughes is the CIA.
Pick it up and put it in this bag. That's right. And next will be a small, harmless snake. Pick it up behind the head. That's right. And put it in here. That's right. All the way, make sure it's in. That's right. And now there'll be a large snake, which you'll pick up behind the head. Behind the head. Quickly. Quickly. Let go. That's right. And your eyes are closing now, just sinking deeper. And as I ask you to open your eyes, you're going to be aware that there's a beaker in front of you. Do not touch the beaker. And there will be 2 other beakers also in front of you. You look at them. It's all right to open your eyes now. You'll see the beakers. Now I want you to focus on this beaker, because shortly I'll ask you to do something. This beaker, you want to be careful of because it is filled with acid. This nitric acid, you've had chemistry, haven't you? And you know that in nitric acid dissolves copper. I'm going to put a penny into the acid. Look what happens. Now I want you to reach in with your hand and pick up the penny out of the acid and put it into this beaker. Take it very quickly. Go ahead. Put it in. That's right. Just put your whole hand and close your eyes. Nothing else at all. Nothing else at all. Only my voice. Nothing else at all. That's right. That's right. All right. Now I want you to put your hand in this beaker. That's right. Only my voice. Nothing else at all. That's right. Now when you open your eyes, you're going to be aware that the beaker is still there in front of you. But beside you, you'll be aware that there's a man who's been responsible for all of the nuisance today, all of the discomfort. And you're going to become more and more annoyed at him as you think about that. In fact, you're going to pick up the beaker and throw the contents right at him. You're going to take the beaker and you'll feel good doing that. All right, and you'll do it quickly. Open your eyes, you'll see the beaker in front of you. Pick it up and throw it at him. Throw it at him. That's it. As you saw, we changed the acid for colored water while the subject's eyes were closed. The subject not only couldn't see this, but wasn't really aware of it because the smell of the acid was strong enough in the area to be quite compelling. Yet she threw the acid, what she thought was acid, at someone else. By the same token, she picked up the rattlesnake, and she was willing to take a penny out of the fuming acid. The reason why she did it, however, was not so much the fact that she was hypnotized, but the fact that she knew that I couldn't afford to have anybody be hurt, And I wouldn't want anybody to be hurt, and for that reason she trusted me. And it was the trust that mattered.
I decided that I liked Anton LaVey. He was a pleasant man. He believed in what he was doing, and underneath his somewhat Mardi Gras exterior, I sensed that there was an individual who did in fact have a new perspective on the human equation, on what humanity is.
The Trojan Horse. The Athenians laid siege to Troy for many years and then abruptly departed, leaving the Trojan horse. The prophet Laocoon warned the city that the Trojan horse held their doom. He hurled his javelin into the side of the Trojan horse and was attacked by a giant multi-headed serpent that emerged from the sea and pulled he and his sons into the sea to their deaths. The inhabitants took this as an omen to mean that the Trojan horse was a gift from the gods, and thus sacred. They brought the offering inside the city gates, and at night the Athenians emerged, opened the gates to their awaiting army, and the city was sacked and destroyed, the men killed, and the women and children enslaved. The Nazi Trojan Horse. Nazi Germany personifies the technological totalitarian state and serves as a model. The subjugation of the Weimar Republic began with the creation of private militias that were used as a springboard to infiltrate the German military and finally the police force. Once the German police forces were co-opted, there was no going back. The Reichstag fire was an excuse to seize power and carry out the Night of the Long Knives, the execution of hundreds of internal political rivals, opponents, and potential threats. Once Hitler had crossed the Rubicon of mass assassination, he publicly declared his actions above the law. The pseudoscience of eugenics, the dogma of German racial superiority, and the theoretical subhuman level of other races was the rationale for wars of annihilation. Hitler's plan was to depopulate vast regions of the East and replace them with Germanic stock. Lebensraum, or living space, was the key phrase. 10 million Jews came under their geographical control, of which 6 million were systematically murdered in an effort to wipe out the Jewish race. 3 million others perished in the camps, including gypsies, Slavs, and other supposed subhuman races, as well as homosexuals, dissident Catholic priests, prisoners of war, union leaders, political opponents, Germans caught aiding Jews, religious sects such as Jehovah's Witnesses, and the intellectuals of conquered nations. The concentration camp of Auschwitz processed 4,756 human beings a day. The Nazi propaganda was so irresistible that many Jews and other targeted groups joined the Nazi movement. In the aftermath of the war, 50 million people had died, and Europe lay in ashes. The Allies wanted answers. How had arguably the most civilized and technologically advanced nation on earth descended into the pit of hell? Who were these men? Were they madmen? Worst of all, if it could happen there, could it happen here? The psychiatrists that studied the prisoners at the Nuremberg trials wrote their collective portrait. Their collective IQ is 140. They have a rigid view of the world, black and white without gray. They were born followers who needed someone to tell them what to think. Though they had unusual personalities among them, they were not insane. The answers the Allies received were not the answers they were prepared to hear. No, they were not madmen, and yes, it could happen here. The psychiatrists noted that there were plenty of similar individuals in the United States who would gladly step over half the bodies of their fellow countrymen to control the remainder. Remote viewing programs were publicly touted as an attempt to spy on the USSR using psychic powers to find hidden Russian bases and gather intelligence information. The military intelligence personalities involved in remote viewing have ties to development programs for microwave and radio frequency radiation weapons that are designed to influence the central nervous system, referred to collectively as psychotronics. These personalities have ties to religious cults as well. Remote viewing began with Operation Scanate and Operation Grill Flame, run by the NSA and INSCOM at Fort Meade under such personalities as Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Bearden, Albert Stubblebine, Ingo Swann, Ed Dames, Harold Putoff, Russell Targ, Paul Smith, and others. Operation Scanate leader Thomas Bearden went on to lead the American Psychotronics Association. Project Grill Flame leaders Ed Dames and Albert Stubblebine began Cytec Corporation, a private remote viewing company which holds the Smirnov patent for a psychotronic weapon. Remote viewers Harold Putoff and Ed Dames have counseled the traumatized victims of death cults and mass shootings, such as the Jonestown mass deaths and the Columbine shootings, even though these men are not counselors, but physicists and military intelligence officers by training. Dr. Harold Putoff exemplifies the contradiction. He is a former NSA officer who developed the pulse microwave laser. He is a remote viewer and a high-level Scientologist who likes to counsel traumatized victims of cults. The concept of remote viewing is being used as a cover, a psychological warfare operation, in order to screen the development of psychotronic weapons and conduct MK-Ultra operations. The same people involved in remote viewing programs for the NSA and INSCOM at Fort Meade and Cytec Corporation are also closely tied to psychotronic weapons development and religious cults that use MK-Ultra methodology to induce multiple personality disorder. These strange threads, such as non-lethal psychotronic weapons development, remote viewing operations, and cults engaged in ritual abuse, are all woven together, suggesting that MK-Ultra and non-lethal psychotronic weapons development have evolved into an elaborate psychological warfare campaign that functions as an infiltration operation and a counterinsurgency aimed at the people and government of the United States. COINTELPRO stands for Counterintelligence Program, primarily run by the FBI as a covert action program against domestic dissidents. The use of infiltration, psychological warfare, harassment through the legal system, and the use of extralegal force and violence, including murder, probably began in the 1950s and is now a permanent feature of U.S. government. Targets included the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the anti-war movement, the environmental movement, opposition political parties, and basically any progressive group in American society. The Senate and congressional hearings into the activities of the FBI and CIA were crushed. The Senate committee's report was edited by the agencies being investigated before its publication. The House committee's report, including an account of FBI and CIA obstruction of its inquiry, was suppressed altogether. Senator Church and Congressman Pike, the committee chairs, were both targeted in their re-election campaigns by the intelligence agencies and defeated, their careers destroyed. The Freedom of Information Act did open up access to FBI documents, and lawsuits forced the release of some COINTELPRO files to the media, but the most important files were withheld or destroyed, and former operatives report that the most heinous crimes were never committed to writing. William C. Sullivan, who ran the COINTELPRO program in the 1960s, was killed in a 1977 hunting accident shortly before giving testimony to a grand jury in 1977. The only two FBI officials who were ever prosecuted for COINTELPRO crimes were quickly pardoned by President Ford. There was an appearance of reform that was largely aimed at placating a weary public, that had become disillusioned after Watergate. The most prominent target of COINTELPRO in the 1960s was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who received a blackmail letter from J. Edgar Hoover that detailed the existence of Dr. King's extramarital affairs and suggested he should suicide himself to preclude the release of the material to the press and its negative effect on his family and his movement. The surveillance of Dr. King included the 112th Military Intelligence Unit and even the use of U-2 spy planes to take photographs. Dr. King was marked, barely a month before his murder, for elimination as a potential messiah who could unify and electrify the black movement. The FBI planned to replace him, quote, in his role of the leadership of the Negro people, with conservative black lawyer Samuel Pierce, who was later named to Ronald Reagan's cabinet. The theme of forced suicide is repeated on others targeted by COINTELPRO. Jean Seberg was an actress involved in civil rights. Her husband received a forged letter from the FBI detailing a fictitious affair she was supposedly having with a black activist. The actress was pregnant at the time and attempted suicide, had a miscarriage, and eventually did commit suicide. Forced suicide on a COINTELPRO target allows intelligence agencies deniability for the crime. In effect, it is the perfect crime. A total of 2,300 officially approved COINTEL actions were admitted to the Senate Intelligence Committee, but thousands more have since been revealed. Ultimately, FBI documents disclose 6 major programs. FBI operatives were directed to disrupt meetings of targeted groups, spread rumors, inflame disagreements over what people normally fight over, money, politics, race, gender, sex, and to exacerbate rivalries and jealousy, to lead activists into unnecessary danger, and to set them up for false prosecutions. False news stories, forged documents, and anonymous letters and phone calls, as well as pressure on landlords and their employers, make up just some of the strategies used against activists. The major violence of the domestic terrorist campaign was directed at the black nationalist and American Indian movements. These individuals were readily imprisoned on false charges or assassinated. British Commander Frank Kitson first codified counterinsurgency operations theory in his book Low-Intensity Operations, Subversion, Insurgency, and Peacekeeping, and he insists that infiltration and psychological operations be mounted against dissident groups in normal times before any mass movement can develop. These tactics were adopted into COINTELPRO against American citizens in peacetime, with considerable energy spent ensuring that the different progressive groups did not link up and cooperate. Specifically, the anti-war movement, composed of suburban white youth, and the black nationalist movement. There was also a major effort to preclude African American leaders from linking up with leaders in Africa. Infiltration of the KKK by the FBI reached 10 to 20% of its membership at the height of the civil rights struggle, and these assets, along with neo-Nazi party members, were used to attack civil rights workers and activists. COINTEL operations are presently being incorporated into the development of microwave and radio frequency radiation weapons. Dissidents that in the past were visibly attacked or assassinated in a traditional manner are now targeted for elimination using electromagnetic weapons. These internal dissidents are used as human guinea pigs and experimental subjects in terminal experiments that are designed to force a suicide, incarceration, or premature death due to the effects of ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. These political assassinations are accomplished with invisible bullets that leave no obvious injuries. The driving of a target to suicide using microwave hearing as well as other techniques is perfectly deniable because these individuals are tormented invisibly, unable to seek help from the psychiatric community due to the symptoms of the attacks mimicking symptoms of schizophrenia that naturally affect several million Americans. Thus, the intelligence agencies have achieved perfect deniability for their crimes. CIA blowback. If the U.S. intelligence agencies are currently engaged in war crimes using directed energy weapons, it would be logical to expect a pattern of prior behaviors that exhibit similar criminal activity. It is certain that the United States has destabilized dozens of countries and overthrown their elected governments. Just how many countries is uncertain. In Iran in 1953, the Eisenhower administration joined forces with British intelligence to overthrow the government of Iran, which was seeking a larger share of its country's oil revenues. CIA Director Allen Dulles and Kermit Roosevelt, the son of FDR, were able to direct Iranian army officers in a coup to overthrow Mossadegh, the elected government, and reinstall the fictitious monarchy of the Shah. The Shah immediately granted British Petroleum a 40% share of the oil concession, and American firms received 40% as a reward for their participation. The overthrow of Mossadegh emboldened the CIA and became a blueprint for future destabilization operations. Mossadegh represented the legitimate aspirations of a nationalist democracy that was thwarted in the name of anti-communism. The resulting chaos and radicalization of Iran is a direct result of interference in the internal affairs of that nation, what is referred to as blowback, the unintended negative consequences of covert actions against foreign elected governments. The Shah was described in a confidential CIA report as a dangerous sociopath who suffered from a dominating father and a sense of the illegitimacy of his mandate to rule. Savak was the name of the Shah's feared secret police, set up with the help of the CIA. The excesses of the Shah and the American selected and trained Savak led to the emergence of the Ayatollah Khomeini and a hostile regime that views the U.S. as a force for evil in the world, hence the litany of referring to the United States as the Great Satan. Guatemala. In 1954, the CIA accepted and carried out a proposal from United Brands, Chiquita Banana, to overthrow the Guatemalan government, which was the only democratically elected government Guatemala had ever had. United Brands and the CIA replaced that government with 40 years of bloodshed under a series of barbaric right-wing dictators. U.S. taxpayers continue to fund these regimes under the repeated threat that if they do not, the Guatemalan people will fall prey to communism. A mere 2% of the population owned 72% of the land. 90% of the landowners were confined to the poorest 15% of the land. United Brands owned the railroads, the ports, and vast tracts of some of the most productive land on earth. Guatemalan President Arbenz had won the election with 65% of the vote in 1950. He tried to fulfill his mandate, which was land reform and a minimum wage modeled on FDR's efforts in the U.S. He seized the largest land holdings, including his own family's, and distributed 1.5 million acres to 100,000 families. The land was paid for in 25-year interest-bearing bonds, perfectly within the guidelines of the Kennedy-era Alliance for Progress program, or U.S. programs in El Salvador and Chile. The only difference were the investments by United Brands and the political influence they could bring to bear on the Arbenz government. In 1966, a swell of revolution brought a full-scale U.S.-sponsored counterinsurgency response program, including arms, advisors, and even Green Berets. A State Department study analyzed the program years later and stated, quote, "To eliminate a few hundred guerrillas, the government killed perhaps 10,000 Guatemalan peasants." Father Ronald Hennessy wrote of one event among many. July 14, 1982, the local military commander sent word for all the people of the village of Penitenac to be assembled for his 11 o'clock arrival. At 4 p.m., all of the men, with their hands tied behind their backs, were escorted by the soldiers into one house, shot, stabbed, and piled one on top of the other and covered with burnable items from the house, which were sprinkled with gasoline and set on fire. The women were treated the same as the men, differing only in that some had live babies on their backs when they were stacked for burning. The other children were tied, one to another, and pulled alive into the flames of a third house by the soldiers. In September of 1981, an association of Guatemalan coroners had complained that they couldn't keep up with the demand for autopsies because violent deaths had increased so rapidly, 50% higher each month than the last. Michael Deaver was instrumental in the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980, and one of his three close advisors, along with Ed Meese and James Baker. His public relations firm, Deaver and Hannaford, took on various right-wing Central and South American landowners and businessmen as clients, among them a group of Guatemalans.
Was not a Guatemalan government. It was a foreign government controlled by foreigners.
And that happened just here in the continent.
Right here in America.
Iraq. In Iraq in 1958, General Abdel Karim Qasem led a coup, took power, and proclaimed a republic. He legalized the Communist Party and decreed land reform, granting autonomy to the Kurds. CIA Director Allen Dulles declared Iraq, quote, the most dangerous spot in the world, and in 1963, the CIA-supported Ba'ath Party overthrew Qasem. The Ba'ath Party shared power until 1968, when the CIA again instigated a coup that culminated in the rise of Saddam Hussein. Hussein had been on the CIA payroll since his early 20s. In 1980, Saddam invaded Iran in fear of the potential Iranian revolutionary influence among his country's majority Shiites. Iran began to win the war in 1982, and the U.S., in fear of the Iranian Revolution, began to covertly aid and arm Saddam. The Reagan administration funneled $5.5 billion through the Atlanta branch of the Italian bank Banca Nazionale del Lavoro, guaranteed by the taxpayers under the Commodity Credit Corporation, to, quote, promote American farm exports, unquote. Between 1986 and 1989, 73 transactions took place that included bacterial cultures for anthrax production, advanced computers, and equipment to repair jets and rockets. In 2002, Iraq was forced to deliver an 11,800-page dossier on the history of its weapons program to the UN Security Council. Bush administration officials took possession of the document first and cut 8,000 pages that detailed American and Western company sales of weapons and dual-use technology sold to Iraq prior to 1991. The legacy of the NSA Act of 1947 that established the national security state had the obvious consequences of the overthrow of dozens of legitimately elected foreign governments during the Cold War. The unintended consequences of blowback has led to a more hostile environment for U.S. national interest in the 21st century, but it has led to other less obvious consequences to the American Republic itself. The power of the U.S. intelligence agencies to overthrow foreign governments at will has also impacted the domestic American political landscape. The ability to destabilize the world almost at will has conferred the same ability to these agencies in American politics. For men with this kind of power, the temptation to play God on the American landscape and to control the future direction and fate of the United States has been irresistible.
The temptation to use public power and play God is almost irresistible.
The Golden Triangle. In China in 1949, the Communists under Mao Zedong drove out the U.S.-backed nationalist warlord Chiang Kai-shek. With his defeated army, the KMT, the Kuomintang, they fled to the Golden Triangle and to Taiwan. Within the Golden Triangle, they took over opium production to finance weapons purchases and the finer things in life. By the 1950s, heroin had become a nationwide concern in the United States. From Senate hearings to popular movies, criminologists blamed addicts for soaring crime rates. These KMT operations were hidden from the U.S. public for 30 years, and it is only recently Afghanistan has captured 90% of the world heroin market. The U.S. exploited the Hmong and Montagnard tribesmen as a source of opium and used the CIA's Air America to bring in guns and supplies in exchange for drugs. Large quantities of heroin appeared in the United States, much of it smuggled inside the bodies of dead American GIs. Addiction plagued the Army in Vietnam to the point of reducing their fighting capacity, and after the war these men brought their drug problem home with them. The U.S. government promoted the drug traffic and intervened to make sure traffic would not be discovered. In the words of one former investigator, quote, "You'd be running a criminal investigation, say narcotics. You'd find out that Inspector so-and-so of your national police is involved in this. You investigate up to a point and you can't go any further. It would go to our headquarters, and then it would go to Washington, and nothing would ever happen. The intelligence gleaned from these people was more important than stopping the drug traffic." The senior public relations man for the DEA offers the explanation, quote, "Their mission was to get people to fight against the communists, not to stop the drug traffic." Iran-Contra. A secret program by the Reagan administration circumvented Congress and illegally sold weapons to Iran, a terrorist nation, in order to pay for a guerrilla war against the Sandinista Nicaraguan government. When the operation was uncovered, it also uncovered an off-the-books operation that, in the words of Senator Daniel Inouye, was a secret government with its own permanent funding mechanism and its own Army, Navy, and Air Force. The exposure of the Iran-Contra operation revealed the tip of the iceberg. Admiral Richard Secord ran a many-faceted program that concentrated on banking fraud, drug smuggling, and illegal arms dealing by officers and former officers of the U.S. military. Oliver L. North, a Marine lieutenant colonel, was assigned to the National Security Council staff beginning in 1981 until he was fired in 1986. North was the White House official most directly involved in secretly aiding the Contras, selling arms to Iran, and diverting Iran arms sales proceeds to the Contras. North was Deputy Director for Political Military Affairs and reported to his superior National Security Advisor, Robert C. McFarland, and later John M. Poindexter. He claimed to have taken much of his direction from Central Intelligence Agency Director William Casey. North testified repeatedly that he believed President Reagan was aware and approving of his activities. North was indicted in 1988 on 16 Iran-Contra charges. He was found guilty on 3 counts. His convictions were vacated in 1990 when an appeals court found that witnesses in his trial were prejudiced by his immunized congressional testimony. Many figures that came under criminal investigation and prosecution in Iran-Contra, like John Poindexter, Elliot Abrams, Richard Armitage, Dick Cheney, Otto Reich, Colin Powell, and John Negroponte, returned to serve in both Bush administrations without serious challenge from Congress. The Contras and the Crips. A San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Blood street gangs of Los Angeles, funneled millions in profits directly to the Contra guerrillas, run by the Central Intelligence Agency. This drug network opened the first pipeline between Colombia's cocaine cartels and the black neighborhoods of Los Angeles, a city now known as the crack capital of the world. Gary Webb broke the story that no other major newspaper would run, and was found murdered in what can only be described as a staged suicide.
We had Contra pilots flying out of Ilopango, smuggling drugs into the U.S., cocaine specifically.
For America, bound from military airfields in Florida and Texas, offloaded out of sight of the law, then shipped to California and other points in the U.S.
Point blank, stay away from it. It's a covert operation being run by the White House.
In the highest councils of our government, in the White House and in the Justice Department. There is no question of that. I can document that.
Turns up wrongdoing. If it turns up wrongdoing, we will bring the people to justice and make them accountable.
The Russian Mind Control Program. Controlled Offensive Behavior, USSR, is a 1972 U.S. Army study of Soviet mind control experimentation. The Russian directed energy weapons program focused on targeting of individuals, not groups. Soviet dissidents were the target of microwave anti-personnel weapons and mine-altering techniques that sought, quote, the total submission of one's will to some outside force. Electromagnetic weapon mind control surfaced in the 1973 Russian Conference on Psychotronic Research. The agenda for the Prague meeting included the following 5 topics: erasure of the subconscious mind, development of ESP, induction of paranormal effects in dreams, the mechanical equivalent of neuropsychic energy, and the psi gene. The Soviets were known to have potent blinding lasers. They were also feared to have developed acoustic and radio wave weapons. A 1987 issue of Soviet Military Power, a Cold War Pentagon publication, warned that the Soviets might be close to, quote, a prototype short-range tactical radio frequency weapon. The Washington Post reported that year that the Soviets had used such weapons to kill goats at 1 kilometer's range. The Pentagon, it turns out, had been pursuing similar devices since the 1960s. The Russian capability, demonstrated in a series of laboratory experiments dating back to the mid-1970s, could be used to suppress riots, control dissidents, demoralize or disable opposing forces, and enhance the performance of friendly special operations teams. Pioneered by government-funded department of the psychocorrection at the Moscow Academy Medical Academy, acoustic psychocorrection involves the transmission of specific commands via static or white noise bands into the human subconscious without upsetting other intellectual functions. Experts said laboratory demonstrations have shown encouraging results after exposure of less than 1 minute. Decades of research and development and millions of rubles have produced the ability to alter behavior on willing and unwilling subjects. In an effort to restrict potential misuse of this capability, senior Russian research scientists, diplomats, military officials, and officials of the Russian Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Technology Policy are beginning to provide limited demonstrations for their U.S. counterparts. Further evaluations of key technologies in the U.S. are being planned, and discussions are aimed at creating a framework for bringing the issue under bilateral and multilateral control. Yet these military capabilities have remained largely unknown to the U.S. and Russian public. The Department of Psychocorrection at the Moscow Medical Academy acknowledged the potential danger of this capability. The Russian experts, including George Kotov, a former KGB general now serving in a senior government ministry post, present in their report a list of software and hardware associated with their psychocorrection program that could be procured for as little as $80,000. According to General Kotov, quote, as far as it has become possible to probe and correct psychic contents of human beings despite their will and consciousness by instrumental means, results having been achieved can get out of our control and be used with inhuman purposes for manipulating the collective psyche. Unquote. The Russian authors note that world opinion is not ready for dealing appropriately with the problems coming from the possibility of direct access to the human mind. Therefore, the Russian authors have proposed a bilateral center for psychocorrection technologies where U.S. and Russia can monitor and restrict the emerging capabilities. Dr. Igor Smirnov, a Russian expert on non-lethal weapons, was brought to the U.S. for a series of meetings in Virginia in 1993. The meetings were attended by representatives of the CIA, DIA, FBI, and ARPA. Civilians included representatives of the National Institute of Mental Health and directors of biomedical research. Dr. Smirnov and his non-lethal weapons technology was brought to Waco during the Branch Davidian siege in 1993 in hopes of using them on David Koresh, but a software problem reportedly made this impossible, and Smirnov could not guarantee its safety. A firm called Psychotechnologies Incorporated, based in Richmond, Virginia, entered into an agreement with the Russians to share and develop this technology for American use. Dr. Smirnov died of a heart attack in 2005, and his patent is now held exclusively by Psychotechnologies Corporation. Psytech is controlled by Colonel John B. Alexander, NSA General Michael Aquino, and Lieutenant Colonel Albert Stubblebine, among others.
He needs the money.
This is called computerized psychotechnology. First, we gather information from the subconscious. Then we determine how a specific personality works.
Officially for psychiatric use, this device was born of the long-standing Soviet effort to get inside the head of the enemy. At normal speed, the numbers on the screen appear meaningless. But when we slowed down our video frame by frame, we found subliminal flashes of words. Words like fear and neurosis. These words trigger electrical activity responses in the brain and reveal private anxieties and other weaknesses.
And this command, which is brought in bypassing the consciousness, has the same effect as a commandment. It's like a word of God. So we simply cannot disobey it.
So we said, well, what are the applications? And they said, well, they had tested with the simple phrase, bring us cake, and that they had piped that bring us cake in white noise up to the ground level, masquerading as just machinery noise, and both the workmen outside and their colleagues who worked on the ground level within 24 hours had come at different times of the day bringing them cake.
MKUltra Unclassified. The military financed all scientific research into development of directed energy weapons. After decades, when progress was on the horizon, the research became classified. The public program was shut down and restarted in conditions of absolute secrecy. The published scientific papers that concerned potential weapons and even bioelectric medicine were reduced to a trickle, but occasional information about their existence continued to emerge. The work of Dr. Michael Persinger, Igor Smirnov, Robert Becker, Eldon Bird, James Lynn, Andrei Puharich, Ross Addy, Jose Delgado, Bill Van Bies, Herman Schwann, and others present sufficient evidence of the existence of these weapons. The earliest work on the effects of electromagnetic weapons on humans was done by Nikola Tesla in the early 1900s. The earliest anti-personnel electromagnetic weapons can be traced to the early to mid-1940s and possibly earlier. The first reference is existent in the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey that reviewed Japanese research and development efforts into a death ray. Human beings, prisoners of war, were used in terminal experiments in the laboratory. Summarizing the Japanese efforts after World War II, Allied scientists concluded that a death ray apparatus might be developed that could kill unshielded human beings at a distance of 5 to 10 miles. Research on living organisms revealed that waves from 2 meters to 60 centimeters in length caused hemorrhage of the lungs, whereas waves shorter than 2 meters destroyed brain cells. Dr. Andrei Puharich studied the effects of radio waves on animals at Northwestern University in the late 1940s. He later founded a laboratory called Round Table Foundation of Electrobiology. Puharich was employed at the Army's Chemical and Biological Warfare Center at Fort Detrick, Maryland, researching the effects of LSD for the CIA in 1954. Puharich perfected the radio tooth implant, a small little relay receiver and transmitter. Dr. Alan Fry, a biophysicist at GE's Advanced Electronics Center, Cornell University, and a contractor for the Office of Naval Research, discovered in 1958 that the human auditory system responds to electromagnetic energy in a portion of the radio frequency spectrum at low power densities well below that necessary for biological damage. Quote, "The human auditory system and a table radio may be 1 order of magnitude apart in sensitivity to radio frequency energy." Dr. Fry proposed stimulating the nervous system without the damage caused by electrodes. He wrote 2 papers, Microwave Auditory Effect and Applications, and Human Auditory Response to Modulated Electromagnetic Energy. Alan Fry experimented with microwaves, seeking to transmit spoken words directly into the audio cortex via a pulsed microwave analog of the speaker's sound vibration. Fry's work in this field gave rise to the so-called Fry effect, which is now more commonly referred to as microwave hearing. Fry's work had obvious implications for covert operations. He synchronized pulse microwaves with the myocardial rhythm of a frog's heart, and the heart stopped beating. Dr. Fry had perfected the induction of heart seizures by beamed electromagnetics. He microwaved cats and found that the stimulation of the hypothalamus had a powerful effect on emotions. Fry found that human subjects exposed to 1300 megahertz to 3000 megahertz microwaves at average power densities of 0.4 to 2 milliwatts per centimeter perceived auditory sounds. The peak power densities were on the order of 200 to 300 milliwatts per centimeter, and the pulse repetition frequencies varied between 200 to 400 hertz. Fry referred to this auditory phenomenon as radio frequency sound. The sensation occurred instantaneously at average incident power densities well below that necessary for known biological damage, and appeared to originate from within or near the back of the head. Dr. Fry was reluctant to experiment on humans, but others, particularly paperclip scientists, were not. Dr. Michael Persinger, a psychologist and neuroscientist, did research on the effects of electromagnetic radiation on the brain for a Pentagon weapons project. He has worked in the field for 40 years, and funded by the Navy and reportedly by the NSA as well. Dr. Persinger perfected a means to make experimental subjects feel that they had been abducted by aliens or had an encounter with angels or God through the use of a modified motorcycle helmet equipped with solenoids to send electromagnetic pulses through the frontal lobes of the brain. Quote, human experience of God can be generated by a process that has nothing to do with whether God exists or not. Dr. Persinger published the paper On the Possibility of Directly Accessing Every Human Brain by Electromagnetic Induction of Fundamental Algorithms, 1995. Quote, a process which is coupled to the narrow band of brain temperature could allow all normal human brains to be affected by a subharmonic whose frequency range at 10 Hz would vary only by 0.1 Hz. Random variations of noise within the matrices could potentially differentiate between individual brains. In other words, individuals could be identified by the specific characteristics of their brain output. He goes on further. Identification of these sequences could also allow direct access to the most complex neurocognitive processes associated with the self, human consciousness, and the aggregate of experimental representations, in other words, episodic memory, that define the individual within the brain. In other words, a person's memory, consciousness, and sense of self can be fully accessed and modified by electromagnetic means, especially a person's personality can be completely shaped, much like the research of Dr. Ewan Cameron, who sought to do so by more primitive means. Dr. Persinger says the brain processes can be circumvented by direct induction of this information within the brain. The basic premise is that the synthetic duplicate